Happy Tuesday, everybody. Man, it's uh, it's been an interesting week, and it's not good news. This is not related to fish at all, but as some might be able to tell, I'm wearing a hat that is baseball related. Some might think this is the Denver Broncos. It is not. It is the Durham Bulls. So those who remember the movie Bull Durham, that was actually like legit, real minor league baseball team. Um, and I know starting this off with some random baseball stuff is probably not something you care about, but like I find it interesting that finally, after way too long, to be honest, the MLB, so Major League Baseball, has reinstated Pete Rose, which means that he's now Hall of Fame eligible. This is the probably the greatest like hitter in the sense of getting number of hits in Major League history. The only person that's relatively close to Rose, and you have to account for his career in Japan as well, is Ichiro, formerly of the Mariners and several other teams. So, kind of a weird, fortuitous day. I hope all of you had a lovely Mother's Day, whether you are a mother or you celebrated your mother, uh, or chose not to if you happen to have a bad relationship with your mother. There are some of those out there too, I know. Uh, but yeah, I hope everybody had a good one. I got to see my mom for a little bit. Um, it's kind of a funny story. I sent her. I didn't know she was planning on coming over to this side of the state, right? Because my mom was on the other side of the state from me, and I had been planning like Sunday. I was gonna drive over to where she is and back in the same day, and then like I think it was like Wednesday or Tuesday afternoon, she messaged me. It's like, "Hey, I'm coming over. Can I stay at your place Friday night?" And I was like, "Okay." Now, what made it funny is that I had ordered a Mother's Day gift for her, a little thing of roses, and because my mom loves roses, so I got a little pot of roses. They were due to get there Saturday because they didn't have Sunday delivery available, and so she's coming over while her gift is being delivered. So at least when she got home, it was there for her, and that was nice. They packed it a little weird, so fortuitously, she's actually getting two pots of roses because the one they sent was packed poorly and several of the roses broke in transit. Now, the bush, because it's a potted plant, it's not just cut roses. The bush is fine. The roots are healthy, so she'll just plant it. And so she'll have two roses instead of one. So like little fortuitous goof up. It was nice. At least the company's customer service was like, yeah, we'll just replace it. It's like that's cool. I just did it through 1-800 Flowers for those that if you care, but yeah, yeah. Anyway, a number of you are like either working or doing water changes listening. Appreciate you. Want to say that. But we'll go into the topic for a second, and I'm curious if you guys have similar thoughts to me on this. Right, so often especially a lot of us who are pretty deep in the hobby, where we're not just setting up our first or maybe our second tank. We have many tanks, whether that many is six, whether that many is like 15, 20. Some of the crazy people out there who are like 50 plus aquariums. You've got your Lucas Bretts and Garden of Eaters of Life, where it's like, I don't even know how you keep track of that many aquariums because they have so many. But often when we're setting up a tank, we usually have like a dedicated space, right? And we're trying to figure out how we fit this into its dedicated space, whether that's a rack, maybe you made a little room and you're gonna repurpose an old entertainment file cabinet thingamajob, whatever the heck it may be, to set a tank on top. And often those space restrictions are what drive your tank choice. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately because, as many of you know who've been watching for quite a while, I had all sorts of kind of random tanks at one point when it comes to like the size of my aquariums. I had one rack that was all these like about 14-ish gallon tanks, those crazy like rimless but high rimmed tanks that I used to use in for a lot of like breeding rainbow fish and raising rainbow fish fry. I had a rack of 10 gallons way back when I used to have like arcade machines and my fish tanks in the same room. So for those of you who've been watching that long, thank you. For those of you who are like, you did what? You could go back and find some old fish room tours where I had a couple of arcade machines in the same room where the retirement tank sits. That used to be my original, like I called it my display room at the time, because that was where my kind of nicer, prettier tanks were, and my functional tanks were in the current room that has the Guppy Mansion. And that was less about looking pretty and more about like pure utility and things like raising up rainbow fry and things like that. And back then, I would put my tanks basically in place purely on how much space do I have and how do I optimize that space. And so sometimes that meant putting multiple small tanks in a space where nowadays, as my like hobby has evolved some, and part of it has to do with the amount that I work versus the amount of free time I have to work on tanks. You know, I've kind of shifted how I keep tanks to mirror the time I have in my life, right? So I've shifted more toward larger singular systems, lots of 40 breeders all over the place. And I was been thinking about this for the last probably a week or so. I was talking with my wife about how we're doing the aquascape. There's kind of a little surprise with the aquascape she wants to do that I don't want to spoil, but we were basically shopping for some supplies to get this set up in the relatively near future. It's probably going to take a couple months. I'm going to be honest here. And we were also admiring some baby guppies. So we've moved the guppies, if you remember, to the under gravel experiment tank. Our first batch of fry has been born, and there's, I would say, like 25 to 30 of them swimming around. So far, recolonizing the guppies is going well. First batch, and we've got another like really gravid female who looks like she could probably drop within the next few days. So we'll have lots and lots of babies in that tank. And the new mission to making the best version of the blue Hawaiian Moscow guppy begins, right? Mostly trying to get color back in the female. But anyway, back on target. I'm all over the place. Sorry, folks. This is how my brain is. You are probably used to this by now. As I've gotten deeper in my hobby, I choose mostly 40 breeders, mind you, but I choose my tanks a little bit more for purpose, as opposed to what can I fit here. I think about what I want that tank to do first before I select the aquarium size. So this is where I want to kind of talk about something that's been an evolution of my hobby, and I want to get your ideas, chat, or replay crew, leave comments down below. Really want to hear from you guys as well. Just how my brain has evolved in the way that I look at the hobby now from my perspective of how I keep things, which is that I feel like when we're trying to optimize a space or number of tanks in a space, especially, we're kind of messing up. I feel like that's us kind of doing it in reverse. We're trying to force something to occur rather than thinking about what do we want the tank to do. And let me explain. So let's look at the humble 20-gallon tank versus the 20-gallon long, right? If you were to look at a lot of breeders, right, that are trying to get rack density and as many tanks as possible, you're typically going to see a lot of either 10 gallons or 20-gallon tanks. But there's a big difference between those who use a 10-gallon and a 20-gallon. What my experience has been is that people like Master Breeder Dean, people who are really good at breeding in very high numbers, tend to favor that 20-gallon normal size tank. It's the same gallonage, right? But the footprint matters. And it's not about necessarily purely optimizing the number of tanks that fit in a rack. That helps. But what it ends up being is that often catching fish and cleaning the regular 20-gallon is faster and more efficient. The 20-gallon long, because of its short, long footprint, it's gives more room for the fish to swim around. So when you're doing a bare bottom tank that's all about breeding fish, or maybe a minimalist amount of things in the tank, and it's more about raising those fish quickly, efficiently, in high capacities typically, and then being able to catch them and do things quickly when it is time to move those fish either to a different tank or to go for sale, that 20-gallon long cost time. And a standard 20-gallon makes it a little faster, but over time, that little faster matters. Or at high enough numbers, that difference in how much you got to chase a fish, how much extra room you've got to clean, etc., matters. This is choosing it based on its end goal. They're both 20-gallon tanks. Now we'll flip the script there. Let's say you're trying to do a nano aquascape. 20-gallon long gives you a bigger footprint to do more things with, whether that's extra hardscape, extra plants. And because of that width, it allows you to create something a bit more dynamic. It's not necessarily about the density of the fish. It's about what we can do to make the scale and that illusion of scale change, right? Where like a tank height, the standard 20, you have less footprint. There's a lot less room to mess with your aquascaping, with your hardscape. It might be slightly better for a few tall plants, but you lose out on room that helps create that illusion of some larger piece of nature. Same gallonage, different purpose. Right? Do you see where I'm going with this? We can go even another kind of dip in the pond. 40-gallon breeders, 60 breeders. The only real difference is that about extra foot in length. Instead of being a 3-foot tank, it's a 4-foot tank. Now, where this matters, right? If you were looking purely at density, you would probably look toward something like the 40-gallon breeder. You can fit more of them. Because it's only a 3-foot tank and not a 4-foot tank, it tends to be a little easier to figure out racking for that as opposed to 4-foot tanks. Because often 4-foot tanks, you're not going to find a rack that will easily hold 2 4-foots without custom building something side by side. So it's a little easier to get 2 3-foot side by side than it is to get the 2 4. Or if you're one of those crazy people that will run them front to back, right? That 36-inch depth versus 48-inch depth matters a ton. I don't think most people do it with tanks that size, but I'm sure someone does, and kudos to them for being far crazier than me. But if you're breeding plecos that are really prolific, let's say like Ancestris, all your bristle noses, that extra 20 gallons might be way more important for your water stability and spacing out caves if you have potentially multiple females and multiple males in a colony than that 3-foot tank's density matters. Because you might be able to more efficiently use that space for your own purposes, and it depends on what you're trying to do with that slightly larger tank. Even though the number of tanks by density goes down, you might find that extra water per individual tank brings you significantly more stability and thus probably can get you more fry in the long run because you're not having to worry quite as much. Or, as JJ Aquatic is saying in chat, those 40 breeders are pretty easy to divide if you're crafty enough. And now you have 2 20-gallon sections. But if you have fish that need basically the same water parameters and you just want to make sure they don't intermix, now you have 2 20-gallon tanks where probably you would have to have individual 40 breeders to do that efficiently. And my example here would be, think Corridoras, right? Corridoras, kind of historically, if you talk to a lot of the really good Corri breeders, the smaller the tank is actually kind of better for the purposes of reliably producing eggs, because the males don't have to chase the females around as much, especially the ones that sit there and they kind of like bonk the side of the female to get her to start laying eggs, right? If they don't have to chase as much, one of the most prolific Corridora breeders I know actually advocates for using 5-gallon tanks. He will put 2 males and a female, or 2 females and 3 males in a 5-gallon tank when he's trying to breed Corys. And then he moves all the eggs to a bigger system for them to raise out. Because he thinks about the fish and what they need to do to most optimally produce eggs. Smaller spaces. Females have less room to run, so when it is time to spawn, the males can get their job done faster. It's not because he's trying to jam as many 5-gallon tanks as possible. That small subset of 5-gallon tanks is just there in his fish room to gather eggs. And once he's got eggs gathered, they move to larger systems. I think he uses quite a lot of like 20 longs, if I remember correctly, to grow out his Corridoras, right? Because Corys don't need a lot of height, but they like footprint, right? They like space. So this is, again, kind of another example of thinking about the end goal of the tank before we ever consider the size of the tank we're going to put together. And we could do this even with our like home community display tanks. If you tend to like a lot of like Corridoras and Plecos, Gobies, Loaches, you don't need taller tanks. You need longer tanks. And my example there would be like, I have a 75-gallon long, right? You guys have known this, you've seen it. That's where my dojo loaches live. That tank's only like 16 inches tall and like 16 inches front to back, but it's 5 foot long. So it creates this super big space where it's an extra foot longer than a standard 75-gallon tank. But because it creates all this space, it leaves lots of room for the loaches to swim around, for Corridoras that are in there to swim around, and even gives decent swim space for the few rainbows that are in there, kind of living out their lives, right? Because it creates this larger area of swim space, it's more beneficial to a lot of the fish that like to stay low and don't really care about going up in the water column. If you don't have fish that need higher water column, like you're not dealing with hatchetfish or angelfish or anything like that, you deal with a lot of stuff that stays low, having a taller tank will never help you. Like the 120 gallon, right? The 4 foot, 120 gallon tank, you have all that extra height, but if your goal is to have just a ton of Corridoras and low-lying fish, you're wasting like half that tank. You might as well just have a 60-gallon breeder. You might as well have 2 of them because of the height stacked up. So this is where I want to say, like, as my hobby has evolved, this has become my thought process. And I kind of unintentionally do it, right? Just because I love the 40-gallon breeder and it fits what I want. It gives me good footprint for plants. Hi, puppy. Instead of shaking her head, bonking her head on my knee. It gives me good footprint for plants, but leaves plenty of swim room for the rainbow fish that I love dearly, right? So I've kind of unintentionally been doing this as I've evolved how I keep my fish over time and got rid of some of my small tanks and went for less number of tanks overall and more larger water systems. But as I thought over it last week or so, that is where I've really kind of come to the point of going like, I think this is a philosophy we need to think about a little bit more. And I know plenty of you in chat probably do this already. You're like, what am I going to do with this tank? Well, that'll dictate the kind of tank. Maybe it's partial space and partial what you want to do. Because maybe it's like, well, I've got room for a 4-foot tank, but I don't have a lot of room front to back. So I could fit a 4-footer, and that's good for these fish that I want to keep. But because I don't have a lot of front to back room, I can't really go with a 75. I should probably only look at like a 55-gallon, right? Or maybe I don't have a lot of height, so I can't go with a 90-gallon, but I could fit a 75-gallon there and still have room to work inside the tank, right? Maybe you're in doing something up in a loft or something like that. I don't know, right? Whatever it may be. But I think the more we think about this, the better overall I feel like we can make our tanks in the long run. So I want to check what chat has to say about my psychotic idea. And then if you guys have questions, as always, at Bentley Pasco makes it super easy for me to see them. And we'll just do Q&A for the rest of the night. Let me go back a little bit in time. See. Laura G, I use Mother Day as a way to get some awesome driftwood and rocks. Nice. It's like, hey, it's this holiday that celebrates me. You should get me these things that I want for my fish. Geek Boy, I have not seen a 20-gallon high for sale in a while. Yeah, I haven't seen like a 20 high. I've seen the standard 20, right? But not like the 20 high. Or they used to be called a 20 tall at one point. But I still see standard 20s like at Petco's. Well, they're kind of changing now that they're all the Imaginatarium tanks and not the Aqueon tanks, but the places that kept Aqueon for a while, I would still see the standard 20-gallon quite a lot. But 20 longs have become way more popular, so that's going to be part of it. JJ Aquatic, Dean breeds a ton of fish that utilize the height. Absolutely. Yes, he does. But he also breeds a number of fish that don't care about the height. And if you notice the tanks, like the last time I fully truly toured his place, right? Plecos and Corridoras and things like that, they were in very different tanks than things like a Pistos and Angelfish. Because he knows exactly what he's trying to do and he optimizes his space because that man knows how to breed fish in the same density for the limited space he's using. Regina, I still prefer the 20 long over the 20 high, just prettier overall. Sure, but so let me ask you this, Regina. You're ahead of time thinking to yourself, I'm going to make this tank pretty. So does that inherently mean that longer format is easier to make pretty, and thus you're already designing for its end goal in the first place? Just the way that I would mentally finagle to say that I'm right. I also like the 20 long. I'm going to be really clear. If I were to have my dream setup, it would probably be a lot of tanks very similar to the 20 long and or 40 breeder. 20 longs are phenomenal in their footprint, especially at their price point when you get them on sale. They're just a really, really good tank. 40 breeder is probably my go-to. I think I've said this before. If I ever get a point to do my garage, it's basically just been nothing but 40 breeders. Just everywhere is a 40 breeder. Although some people were trying to convince me that I need to get 60 breeders. And I was like, cost. The 40 is still significantly cheaper. JJ Aquatic, if you're breeding Corys, 20 long makes way more sense. Yeah, we kind of covered that. Laura, I have a 12-gallon bookcase rimless. Those are super cool tanks. I'm going to take a slight break and then go back to it. Those are super cool tanks. There's that in there's a 13-gallon that was out for the 13 extra long or whatever it was. And then eventually you got the 33 long, right? They're all kind of the bookcase type tank. They're all just really cool. I've seen some really amazing ones that kind of made me for a few seconds abandon most of my normal sane ideas because of the type of fish I keep and be like, I could do something cool with that weird thing. It's 3 feet long. I can put more fish in it versus the same size, but standard, simply because the fish have more room to swim back and forth. Yeah, that's another thing, right? Because of the swim room, it allows you to feel more confident about putting a slightly higher volume of fish into it. Even though, if you were to be one of those old stickers inch per gallon, the gallonage would tell you can't hold that many. But we know, as long as our maintenance is good and we're taking care of things, that extra swim room really matters, especially for a lot of our small nanofish. You think your rasboras and some of your tetras and things like that. The more room you give them, that kind of more crazy stuff you can do. 60 breeders are great because you can divide them. Oh yeah, we got that one, which also is very cool. That's one thing that I've seen one person do. And the first time I saw it, I was like, why don't more people talk about this? I tried to get that person to let me do an interview, and they're like, no, I'm too camera shy. And I'm like, okay. And then I think I forgot about it because I was too busy doing too much stuff. I should have talked about it way before. I bought a used Aquarium 38 gallon. That is an OG tank, because not a lot of people use those anymore. It's such a strange size, but it was basically new and cheap. I kept glow light Danios, lamb chop rasboras, and Juliet Cories. It's fine for them. It sounds like a fantastic tank. I had for a while a 60 gallon. So all that is a taller 40 breeder, right? And I swear they don't make this thing anymore. And for a while, I was trying to make it into this really cool tank, but I kept having seal issues. And we even resealed it a couple times. And no matter what, it seemed like that thing refused to accept a seal properly. So we had to abandon said tank. And that was when, for those who've been around for a while, my Kochu Tetras ended up in the 40 gallon Plants for Profit main tank, is because that 60 kept leaking, because that's where they were going to live, because they used a lot of that upper water column space. Then I just put them in a giant plant jungle, and they were happy as can be for years. So, you win some, you lose some. Leo, 36 months, man. 3 years. Thank you, brother. So far, that new Biomaster 350 Thermo is running amazing. They fixed a lot of issues with the older model. PS Charmander is the best starter. So for those that don't know, Awaze released the version 2 of a lot of their Biomaster and Biomaster Thermo series. And they made some improvements to it, probably based on a number of the minor complaints from us overly critical human beings in life. I'm not saying it was me. Probably not me, actually. But a number of people have voiced their various criticisms, rooms for improvement. Pick the term you prefer. I like to see it as an opportunity for improvement, but basically voice their problems, and they've made some adjustments to it in the new one. And so far, Leo is quite liking his version 2 of the Biomaster 350. So that's cool. Very cool. I'm actually I have the I think mine's a 350. It might be the 600. I don't think it's the 600. I think it's the 350. But mine is getting to a point of where the primer pump will leak a little every time you use it, but once it's flowing, it's fine. It doesn't leak. But it's when you're trying to prime it, a little bit seeps out of the top. And it's kind of getting toward the point of where it doesn't prime super well anymore. So I've been considering having to replace it. I've been trying to figure out what I want to replace it with, because I do like the pre-filter on the Awaze. It makes maintenance a lot easier, and I even pre-filter it again inside the tank with a pre-filter sponge. So it's pre-filter into the pre-filter unit, then into the Awaze. I've never really had to service the main body because of the rate at which I service the pre-filter. So both the internal and the external that I've added. And I just watch flow, right? And once I see the flow start to dip enough, it's usually the external first, and then about every other time I service the external pre-filter, I need to service the internal pre-filter. But usually it's not so, because of that external pre-filter, it's not so gunked up that it was causing issues internally. It's just age over time. I've noticed that particular primer mechanism, even though I love it because it works when it's new, it works so much better than almost any other primer that I've seen on a canister filter. Over time, though, they get kind of wonky, and I'm curious, over time, how you're going to like the new version and if they made some improvements there. So you'll have to let me know. A year from now, you'll have to remember that. Queen Bleh of Ghosting. I think I am able to keep Creeping Jenny, the plant, just by floating it. I've seen a number of people grow it floating, so I would think so. I personally have not. I planted it when I grew it 6 years ago. I picked it up really quickly just for some fast hat points in my horticulture rewards program, because it wasn't one I wanted to grow out in any of my crazy tanks. It was just I was in a phase of how fast can I cycle through plants for my HAP program. That's horticulture rewards program, for those that maybe are not used to that acronym. JJ Aquatic, the 40 breeder is hands down the best smallish tank ever to grow out Cories. I mean, I can't argue with that because I don't grow out a lot of Cories, but I can understand from the footprint, water volume, etc., that it would be hard to contend with other tanks. Unless you were doing maybe a low boy, a 50 low boy, and you had that kind of space, right? Because low boys, or you could also do 90 gallon low boys. I imagine that's amazing for growing out Cories because there's just so much footprint. But yeah, yeah. Whoa, catching up. I'm catching up, chat. Promise, promise. Richard Cox, aquarium domain ruined everything with thinking about tank sizes. Now I want a 1,000,000-gallon tank like this. It's true. Like when your small tank is like 1,200 gallons, it really warps your perception of things, right? It's like, oh yeah, here's my 600-gallon, and like you look at all the rest of your tanks and his tanks, and you're like, so that's your nano tank then. It's just such a wild change compared to like what the rest of us humble normal aquarists are used to. Oh man. Luke Wang, I've never seen any fish that is unhappy about a bigger footprint. Only ones that we don't want to do it for, since we never see the fish again. That's fair. That's fair. I mean, most fish love more swim space, more water, etc. But we're not all of us can be aquarium domain and build like 1,200-gallon tanks like they're nothing. Oh man. Amazon Pancakes 125 long is my favorite tank size. Love the extra length. There was a joke earlier about size matters, right? Taking it to an extreme. Um, interesting. Dean's video on how to breed Aquarius uses a 20 tall. I think a lot of that just has to do with the way that he's shifted his room in general. But yeah. Stephen P. Aquatics, do you scape the 20 long, or have you already let the 20 long scape you? Philosophical questions we may never know the answer to. Leos, don't you think a 75-gallon would be better breeding tank? So, let me answer that. I think it would be potentially a better raising tank. However, in my case especially, right? Rainbow fish dum dum. I know, we've parroted this a lot. However, let me explain why. That 75, right? For the first like 2.5 to 3 months of a rainbow fish's life, they live primarily in the first like 1.5 to 2 inches of water. Sometimes only an inch, depends on the species. So all that extra room just doesn't matter. So by going to that 4-foot tank that's also a bit deeper front to back and requires you to use some slightly different racking, or maybe it changes the number of tanks you can fit in your room overall, or how much space you have to maneuver and work, you're not gaining that much compared to a 40. The 40 is really, really optimized, at least in my head. I know plenty of people that raise up their rainbow fry in just standard 20s or standard 10s. But in my experience from having raised rainbow fry, if I wanted to accelerate their growth, I think the 40 breeder is like the most optimized thing. Plus, in general, I like having not completely bare bottom tanks. So like I would have substrate and probably a few plants, most likely some Java fern or something really simple. Because I feel that helps them have spaces to hide and feel comfortable, or areas that help disrupt some flow if they need something to feel a little safer especially when they're very young, right? You want to have limited flow in certain areas. Now, granted, you can do things like under gravel and all that kind of stuff to help limit your flow. We won't get into that. There's lots of options, but these are like little benefits that you can kind of stack together to create a more optimized setup, at least for the way that I like to do things. We'll put it that way. There's a lot of personal preference that comes into this. I would be curious to ask someone who raises just like a metric ton of rainbow fish, like Marcel out in Wisconsin, a Roseline 17, for those of you who are familiar with Aquabid, what tank size he tends to gravitate toward and why. I know that like Larry Schenkel, who's down in California, he was using a lot of, I think, just like standard 20s. I'm sure Luke could correct me because I know that Luke knows Larry a little bit. But I'm trying to think back to a lot of the tours I've seen at his place for a lot of his raising tanks. And that's what comes to mind. It has been like, I think 3 years since I've watched a tour at Larry's place though. So, Alyssa, good to see you, my friend. 40 breeders seem to be drillable, just by the way. Yeah, in general, like 40 breeders are a little easier to drill, slightly thicker glass. There is a risk at like drilling, say, like 10-gallon tanks, because it's a thinner glass. It's a little easier to crack them, etc. Yeah, Sweet Polly, I want to try rainbows so bad. Do it. There's so many rainbows. That's one of the cool parts about rainbows. There's so many interesting, colorful fish that you can choose from at all sorts of different sizes, and that includes the pseudomagills. Right? They're very similar in their behavior and what they do and why they're interesting. But there's also kind of like the middle small fish, which is like the Rhamnocentris or say Melanotania pygmea, the pygmy rainbow fish. Dwarf neon rainbows is another example. A lot of the Maculacae species stays relatively small, and then you can slowly start getting bigger. You get like Kamakas. You can get into um, some of the Chalatherinas don't get super big unless you give them lots of space. Running river rainbows don't get super big, and they're typically like 3.5-ish inches at max size. They might get a little tall in the body, and a little chonky, but they're not getting super huge. And then eventually you start getting toward the bigger boys like your Bosmani and turquoise, Herbert axelrodi, the yellow rainbow fish, goiter rivers. Those guys get up to like 5 inches, and you kind of steadily go up the chain until you get bigger and bigger. But there's lots of color and options at all sorts of different sizes that being kept in a lot of different tanks. I have a friend who breeds Rhamnocentris ornatus, the Ceres Creek line, in a 20 long. And he's got this just massive colony, and to a point of where like he typically, until it comes to the season to like sell off a lot of them, has 2 or 3 tanks just full of fry because they breed so prolifically. But they're relatively peaceful and they tend to not pick on their fry, so the fry can grow up with the parents until it gets too dense. And then you got to start moving some of the juveniles away so that other young can grow up. So there's all sorts of stuff you can do, right? All right, Omar, apparently, for me, it totally depends on the fish first. But if I had to pick between a 20 long and a 20 high, I would pick the 20 long any day. Fish swim side to side, not up and down. Yes, except frogs. Frogs go up and down. What if you're doing an African frog tank? Still probably better have the 20 long, but yeah, I think that's another thing where you're doing it on its end goal, right? Its purpose. If we're thinking about what gives fish the most room, well, then more than likely we're looking at something like a 20 long. But if we're trying to go like density as a breeder, we're probably looking at a standard 20, right? The 20 high. Things like that. Jeff C., I know they're not as practical, but I like column tanks. You're that one, huh? It's like you and the hex tank apologist. The weirdos out there. No, actually, like hex tanks can be really cool. And so can column tanks. I can think of a column tank that used to be at a fish store I used to go to when I was growing up that was just full of male fancy guppies as a display tank. So it's just this like column of color swimming up and down in this tiny little space right by a bookcase. It actually made like perfect sense. But yeah, I mean, you can do kind of anything, right? Right? All right, let me see. Sid, my work got the Wabenmooster honeycomb plecos in recently, and they're amazing. What's your favorite pleco or bottom dweller to keep with bows? So if I were to pick, let me bounce across a couple different bottom dwellers because I do feel like there's a combo of things I like. I love a lot of the Ancestris. I feel like if I'm keeping them purely for cleaning purposes, the like super red short fin bristle nose is just like a crazy efficient cleaner that is not afraid of being like right in front of humans at all. I raising a bunch of them currently that John Ebson, who's in chat, like they were originally his fry and have grown up, and now I'm raising babies from those fish. But if I were to pick like the Ancestris I like the most, I think the Wabenmooster is probably it. And a lot of that comes down to when the males want to spawn, they turn like neon yellow. It's actually really cool to see. And the females keep this wonderful yellow stripe on their tail. And just their pattern is more prevalent where the males get super dark as they get old until they want to spawn. And then like they go neon yellow and that honeycomb pattern really shows up. The females stay a little lighter in color. So that honeycomb pattern is always present on the females. I like that kind of dichotomy that's in that fish, that change between the two. And as an adult, they're really enjoyable. And then when you see babies, they're super cute looking. So probably that for a pleco, as far as like ancestris. I wouldn't keep a lot of your like carnivorous fancy plecos in with rainbows, because rainbows will not let their food sit around very long, and thus the plecos would probably suffer. So I would keep them in their own tank. Now, Corridoras, ooh, ooh, it's really tough. I think it depends on the rainbow I'm with. My favorite is probably the Equus, because the Equus, and I've observed this so many times in my Running River rainbows, they will swim up mid-water and school with the rainbows. And it's just such a cool thing to watch, right? These green with that big orangey golden, like, harness, so to speak, around them, swimming up right alongside all your rainbow fish, like just completely living in this like wonderful harmony, don't exist anywhere near each other in the world, and yet get along perfectly in a tank and fabulously. The other one would be like the Adolphoi or um, Duplicarius, because they both look so similar, but white and black with like the orange shoulder, just really cool fish. In big groups, they are just so fun to watch because they stay pretty tight knit, or at least the ones that I've owned in the past. They stay really close together a lot, so kind of see them whipping around together. And that like white black pattern with the orange shoulder really pops compared to the color of rainbows. And I tend to keep dark substrate, so it's really easy to see them swimming around. Loaches would be the next thing. I know this isn't necessarily what most people would suggest, but like because of my wife, Dojo Loaches. If I were trying to set together a more like cohesive, not biotope, but like regionotope, terrible fake term, I know, but like they all come from a very similar region, but they don't ever live together. Probably the dwarf chain loach, just because they're such a like efficient bottom feeder. They do a really good job of kind of churning substrate, especially if you were trying to go with like a more sandy bottom tank. I think those would go really, really good with rainbows. Am I missing any other bottom dwellers that I feel I need to cover? Not really. I'm sure Chad is going to bring up some other types of bottom dwellers that I'm missing, but those would be the three main categories I'd look at: Pleco, Cory, Loach. But yeah, there you go. There's my choices. It almost doesn't matter what the rainbow is. I maybe with the Equus it matters, because like bigger rainbows, they might not school together as cleanly, but with some of the smaller ones like the running rivers, they do, and it's just so wonderful. Yeah. Regina, does anyone know what new Hang On Back is coming out? KG Tropicals has been hinting. I would assume it's something from Seche, because they sell a lot of Seche products. I have no clue what it is. I haven't been paying that much attention, honestly, to KG Tropicals lately, because I've been consuming less aquarium content in the last like month or so. I've just had other stuff in my ears while I've been at work. I don't know, I'll probably flip back to it in the next week or so, because it'll be like, I haven't watched much aquarium stuff in a while. I need to watch aquarium stuff. Yeah, you know how we are. We are like, when you have multiple hobbies, you kind of like float between them. It's just what it is. Nope. I know I'm way behind. That's what happens. I'm talking too much. You don't forget depth matters as well. Oh Lord. Have I seen the new Eheim Vario canisters? I have not. So now I've got to go look at them apparently. Let's see. I know I'm missing some other things. Bum, 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 bum. Robert Johnston, do you know of a parasite that can be active for a year and not kill the fish? I've had an issue in a tank with flashing for 11 months. I've tried lots of meds, running out of options. Interesting. So, full disclosure, I am terrible at identifying parasites and diseases. Bad at it. Most of that is because I keep a fish where it's basically like one of two diseases is all you ever see, and there's only like one parasite you ever see, which is Calamanus worms or Camelanus. Man, can I not even remember? It's been so long since I've had them, because I just don't gamble with my rainbows anymore. I go to like two known sources that I care about, and they never have them. But But I got them once, let me tell you. Oh man, I had to bite a bullet on that because I lost a few of my like really nice breeder fish to those dumb worms. A little sip of the old water there. The flavored Costco water. Ooh, I'm so fancy, I know. Um, Luke Wang, if you lock the lines first, then unplug it, and make sure you don't turn it back on until your water line is above the intake, you shouldn't need the the priming plunger. Yes, but I'm lazy, so the primer's my friend. But I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying. Um, but yeah, sometimes it likes to be complaining. Leo, isn't there a new canister also coming out? I think CJ, right? Or was it Fluval? Well, I don't think Fluval has any new canisters coming. I think they've kind of released everything unless they're going to like an 08 series, and then it's just an improvement on the 07. It's not really new. The FX2 is kind of the newest thing they've put out recently. I don't think they're putting out anything else anytime soon, or at least nothing that I've heard of. Um, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a new CJ product. It seems like CJ puts out a new product every like year or so. They're a little bit more aggressive in putting stuff out. Although I do want to see those Eheim Varios because like Eheims historically have just been such good canister filters. I'd be very curious. Alyssa, did you see the Aquarium Co-op address my 2 complaints about their sponge filters? I'm actually tempted to try a few. In that they're creating a finer sponge and not the coarse one. What's your second complaint? Because I can't. My brain is not processing right now. I know that we've talked about how the coarse sponge is kind of a pain in the butt for our personal purposes. But yeah, yeah. Oh, instead of green, getting it in black. All right, all right. I mean, that's good. I will say I want to go up to the store because now that the expansion's open, I was super busy last weekend or last 2 weekends. So like the one when they did the expansion itself, and then the day out or the weekend after. So I haven't had a chance to go out there, but I'd rather see it in person. I did watch some of the videos that Corey did, and my only complaint is like it just feels like a larger version of the same thing, and it didn't feel like the expansion brought anything super new and interesting, other than like there's the giant tank now. That's the 1,440 gallon or whatever. But yeah, I don't know. We'll see. I gotta go there in person and just like see it, experience it properly. I got to be in there a couple times when it was under construction, and like definitely the extra space like made my brain do all sorts of like, ooh, we could think of all the interesting things that can be done, right? But you also have to make it manageable and walkable for customers and all kind of stuff. So can't go too crazy. 600 gallon is almost big enough for a beta. Are you my friend Joel? Are you Corvus Oskin in disguise? He's joked about like making some massive tanks and then putting only a beta in it. Although, granted, I do believe the man would seriously do it given the opportunity. Wait, Larry's up in Oregon now too? When did Larry move to Oregon? I did not know he moved to Oregon. That's crazy. Is he close to the Portland area, or is he like down south or over toward Bend or something like that? You might have to just like you've got the bat phone. You might just have to message me at some point, Luke. Because man, I'm wondering if did he reset up a fish room. I took his 72 by 24 by 18 and 2 of his 24 by 24 by 12s. They're running the greenhouse now. That's cool. That's cool. That's cool. Fish Family being a better YouTuber than I am. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate you. What do you think of a Molly that is priced to $350 a pair? What the what kind of Molly is this? What kind of Molly is $350 for a pair? That thing better be the most magnificent thing I have ever known. It's either that or tariffs are crazier than I thought they were. 3G, they're developing strains just like those goldfish varieties. Okay, so here's my thing. I don't think mollies have the level of popularity to demand that kind of price like a goldfish will. especially like koi. Like, I don't know. I think most people who are really into live breeders tend to favor guppies when they're going for fancy. And I don't think outside of like some of the crazy like sailfin molly types, especially like the Yucatan molly, I don't think you got a lot of people that are like gonna go like bat wild crazy over mollies, especially like $350 for a pair. That seems wild. That better be the most like immaculate looking fish I've ever seen in my life. I just can't imagine spending that much money on mollies. Amazon pancakes. Snow white bristlenose are beautiful. I've had a lot of success with breeding them. So my friend Alyssa, who's in chat, she has bred a lot of snow white bristlenose. They're really cool fish. They're really really pretty. I'm just speaking from my personal experiences when I select things because I've never kept those. So I don't know their behavior as intimately as I do like the short fin, super red, or the Wabamooster, which the Wabamooster's like to hide a lot, but they're cool fish. So, yeah, what do you do? It's kind of like the 183s, the starlights. Such a cool fish. They hide a lot, at least in my experience. And where is this? Like, I need to see this thing. I will say they have the same stuff as I have at the shop I work at. So I guess there's only so many wholesalers, right? And wholesalers only have so many suppliers. Yeah, I think it's that. But like, we all know we've seen so many interviews with Corey and stuff, right? Where he talks about his philosophy on like how he stocks his store. And I know that like back when back when Robert was the store manager, for those of you who followed Aquarium Co-op for a while, you probably remember Robert from some of the unboxings. Robert and I are really good friends. We talk very regularly. Um, and a lot of his like, we're just keep in touch with each other because he's in Texas now. So he's not, if he was here in Washington, we'd hang out more. But like right before he left for Texas, like we went out and had lunch for like 3 hours and just sat and talked, man, just talked like idiots. But, and so like I can remember when Robert was the store manager, he would bring in some interesting stuff kind of more often than my experience has typically been with managers after Robert. Although Bree, who was the last manager when I used to go to the store pretty regularly, um, also would bring in some cool stuff every once in a while. So, there's that. But and maybe it's just change, right? Lists change all the time. You might find stuff that isn't as popular, and those suppliers stop trying to bring them in because they just don't sell well, or maybe they get lots of complaints, or they have lots of health problems with them, whatever it may be. But yeah, I mean, there's only so many suppliers until you start playing like the game that Dan and Dan's Fish is playing, where you're like sourcing directly from farms, and that kind of opens up some of the floodgates to a lot of more interesting things, or similar to what Jason at Redfish Bluefish was doing, bringing in all of the like crazy different epistogramma lines, right? Where you just had so much variety in episto and you could bring in a lot of stuff. But you kind of have to be a specialized retailer, and that tends to be better for online sellers than it does for someone like the Aquarium Co-op, where they don't sell fish online. It's just in the store. And when you're just in a store, you kind of need to focus on the bread and butter, which is the things that the more casual fish keeper is going to walk in and want, as opposed to like, the crazy pants people like me or a lot of us who are here in chat where we're like, okay, this is the thing I'm really into, and I want to see like 45 different versions of that thing, right? So that I always have an option, as opposed to like the average person who's like, why do you have so many of these like, random silver 2-inch fish? I'll just wait like 6 more months when the color comes in. Like, I don't want to wait 6 months for color. I want color now, whatever it may be. Or like, why do I want these like 14 varieties of potatoes that just hide in a corner? Like, well, when you get to see them spawn, they actually look really cool. Or, they hide in a cave most of the time. When they come out, man, it's such a fun experience. You finally get to see them. You haven't seen them in 3 months. Like, why would I keep a fish like that? I'm like, you'll get there eventually, right? Those of us that dive down are like whichever one of our wells we're really into. That's a lot of it. Larry is about 30 miles from Corvallis. 30 miles south, I'm assuming you mean? So we're talking into like, is that Eugene? That's right there. Or we're talking north into like Salem. East. Oh. or rather east. Oh, okay. It's an interesting spot. 30 miles is not that far. Like I have a friend who's in Corvallis toward Lebanon. Okay, cool. Cool. Then I know where you're talking now. So you mean I might have to try and visit Larry at some point? Does he have like a new fish room that he's built? Do we know? I care. I love Larry. He's such a great person. But yeah. Let me see here. I want to make sure I didn't miss any questions. We're kind of toward the end. If you have a last question, get it in now. Can Moina survive the winter cold? You know, unfortunately, I have to ask Google. I have to remember what Moina are. Oh, yeah. These little things. Because they're like kind of a Daphnia, right? I mean, technically not, but. Or technically are, maybe? No, because Daphnia magna and Moina are different. So let's look at temperature range. Google says 68 to 86. So they can technically tolerate a wider range. I would guess you probably want to be right around that like 70 to 74 range. So probably not going to handle winter temps very well, according to the Googles. I've never tried to keep them, so I'm relying 100% on the internet to be correct and not lie to me. Because we know the internet never lies and always tells the truth. Don't blame Larry for leaving Stockton. Oh, I won't blame him. I mean, like, Dr. Maz moved up to the Portland area. And that's, I think, I've got to find a meeting when I know that Dr. Maz is in town and not in Peru. That's down at the Greater Portland Aquarium Society, so I can go see Dr. Maz. I need to do that soon. I love seeing Dr. Maz. He's wonderful. Stum Daphnia will lay eggs that hatch in spring, but not sure about Moina. I have seen that with a bunch of the like Northwest species of Daphnia, where like during the summer they're crazy, in the winter they go dormant, and then the same bucket of water will suddenly have Daphnia again. So yeah, that I have experienced personally, trying to keep them outdoors for a while. I can remember way back 2019. I know ages ago, back before the dark times of the pandemic, when Preston John, the puffer god of the United States, was up at my house, and he's like looking at all these like buckets of water and tanks I had in my backyard when my former roommate used to live here, and we did way more fish stuff than I do now. And he's like, okay. Looks really close, gets all close. He's like, can I take a scoop from this bucket? And I was like, what? How are you going to get that on the plane? He's like, oh, I'll just carry it in like a coffee cup. They don't care. I'm like, what? What? They won't look at the fact that the bugs are swimming around in the coffee cup? He's like, no, don't worry about it. And I'm like, yeah, okay, what is it? What do you care about this in there? He's like, oh, no, this is a species Daphnia I don't own. They're smaller than the ones I keep, so they'll be really good for the puffers when they're at this age to this age. I remember I was staring at him like, okay. But, you know, when you're breeding bajillions of puffers, what do you do? I'm predicting a loach farming in Bentley's future. My wife would love that. But loaches are kind of hard to breed. I will say this. I'm gonna let this out, right? Since we've made the adjustment to the tank that my wife is gonna aquascape, and the guppy mansion is no longer gonna be the home of the guppies. And what's gonna happen is that spare guppies will move into the tank my wife is aquascaping, that beautiful rimless tank that I got, right? Because there's not gonna be rainbow fish in there, and guppies aren't super crazy about being like ridiculously fast to get all the food. We're also gonna put something in there for my wife. We're getting coolie loaches. We're gonna have all sorts of noodles up in that beast. Because my wife wants to like set up the rock so that tons and tons and tons of noodles can be everywhere. She's very excited for this. I want to be very clear. My wife is super excited to have an army of little noodles in her tank. and I promised her army of noodles, which means I probably got to buy at least like 30 of them, so the wallet's gonna hurt, but it'll be fun. Mm. I missed that. Was that Mountaintop or Preston John that took the Daphne? Preston John. Preston John. Zipuffa Man himself. Which, man, I haven't talked to Preston in a while. I need to like call that guy, figure out what he's doing. I haven't seen him lingering in chats all that often, but I know he's a busy dude. So, your auction is coming up. It passed already, I think. I couldn't go to our auction. I had plans for like a month and a half before then, and it was really hard to fit that schedule. So, yeah, I missed my own club auction, even though that's like the first one I've ever missed since joining the club, which means I just have to go like really hard in November. Yeah. Last couple things I want to cover. Also have a customer who's claimed to have bred Coolie Loaches. Seems odd, but he seems pretty adamant. I mean, it's possible, I'm sure. I have no clue how to breed them. I need to find some more neon Coolie Loaches. Oh no, what is this? What's a neon Coolie Loach? Hold on. This might be something I can't let my wife know exists. Because right now we're looking at like your basic kind of striped Coolie Loach. What the? Hold on. Hold on. Chat, you have to see this thing if you haven't. We need to save it over here. And we need to go over to this thing. Where is what I'm looking for? That one. Let me change this. I know. You get my wonderful narration of my brain processing. Slowly, ever so slowly. What the heck? Oh, it's because I'm looking in the wrong folder. Like a dummy. Where'd you go? There it is. Okay, now we need to get this to a reasonable size. We're going to fill the screen with this thing. You don't need to see me anymore. I don't matter. This is a very tall photo. Let's just see how well we can see it. There it is. Look at this thing. This is a neon Coolie Loach. I am sure getting this is very expensive. Supposedly, Aqua Imports has them. But, I don't know how much you want to trust said place. But check that bad boy out, man. That is a cool looking Loach. It reminds me of the Neon Gobi, just longer and noodlier. Such noodle. Much wow. By the way, Johnny Best, thanks for the gifted membership, buddy. I really appreciate it. You're always like so generous, dude. You never need to be. You never need to be. They're like $4 to $5 each retail? Really? Can you get them? Because, reasons. On Loaches, no idea what to do, but I've got Myers Eye. That's one of the Hillstream Loaches, right? The Neons don't get as big as the standard Coolies. Oh, that's unfortunate. Because I actually kind of like the size the standard Coolie gets because it makes them a little easier to see. I really like the standard striped Coolie. I think they're just so pretty. They're so pretty. But anyway, yeah. I have some Sumatras too. Love them when I see them. Interesting. All you got some cool Loaches. Jeez, I'm jealous. Skipper's auction. Although I'll bring bringing Dr. Souza up next month, so I'll possibly see you then. Oh, up tier to the Seattle area? Message me, man. Tell me what's going on, because I've been very out of the loop. I've been super busy the last like 3 months and just like completely missed all the things. Where do you live state-wise? We're moving next year to Southern California from Singapore. So I live in the Seattle area of Washington State. I technically live south of Seattle. There's a number of different like south of Seattle suburbs. I live in one of those. I used to say it a lot, but yeah, I've been a little more careful about where I live just because the internet does crazy stuff nowadays. You know how it is. If you dig deep enough, you can find it. But yeah, basically, I'm in the Seattle area. Um, not terribly far from Seattle and Tacoma, the two kind of like major cities that are in the area. But yeah, I've lived here like my whole life and stuff. I love it here. JJ Aquatic, how many pairs of Bozeman can I keep in a 55 gallon with a Fluval 407 and weekly water changes? Also, what are my best options for frozen food outside of Daphnia? Bozeman will eat surprisingly small food, so like frozen Cyclops is actually really good for them. You could also look at even live baby brine, works well, or frozen baby brine. They'll eat tons of it. What are you growling at? Don't even. Just chill. We're almost done. There it is. We gotta have one every time. One moment. You gonna come here and stop barking? That's a good girl. Doggies, what do you do? Rub it in with your perfect fresh air. Yeah, the dog's kind of telling me it's time. Anyway, that's like a Stiffidon goby and Coolie Cross. Yeah, it's such a cool looking fish. I might have to like try and find that. I think that'd be really cool to like mix in with some fish. My wife would probably lose her mind if they just suddenly showed up and she didn't know. Gonna have to probably do that if I can. Worst thing is you can't keep them with anything like 3 inches or bigger because those fish will 100% eat those neon coolies. Rainbows don't eat a lot. Well, they're going to be in with guppies. So that should be okay. It's going to be guppies and coolies. That's it. There might be like autocinclus or some snails, but you know, nothing too crazy. So I think it should be fine. Should be fine. There won't be any plecos in that tank. Or any bigger loaches. Just the small boys. Small boy tank. It'll be good. All right, gang. I want to thank you all for being here. Just chilling, hanging, conversing with me about choosing aquarium sizes and why I'm wrong or why I'm right. I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your week. As always, thank you so much for watching and stay awesome. Now I gotta go find them dang neon fish for my wife because she'll go crazy for them.